A question that shook us. Have you ever stared at your bank account late at night and wondered if love can survive numbers? Not poetry, not memories, just numbers. I'm asking because 3 weeks ago, in a quiet American kitchen, with a sink full of dishes and kids finally asleep, that question hit my marriage like a dropped glass. Not loud at first. Just sharp. Maybe you're tired of trying. Maybe you've told yourself you'll learn English someday, when life gets easier. This video is not about someday. It's about now, about money, marriage, and the small human moments that quietly decide whether we give up or keep going. I didn't come to the United States chasing drama. I came chasing stability, better income, better future for my family. That word better sounds clean, hopeful, almost innocent. But inside a marriage, better can become heavy. In our 3rd week here, rent felt high, groceries felt expensive, and time felt thin. Every decision had a price tag. Even silence. One night, my partner asked very calmly, "Do you think money can save a marriage?" Not angry. Not accusing. Just curious in a dangerous way. You know that tone. The kind that means the question has been waiting a long time. I didn't answer right away. My brain froze, like when you hear English too fast and your mind blanks out. That pause said more than words. Psychologists call this cognitive overload. When stress stacks up, financial pressure, cultural shock, parenting, language barriers, your brain goes into survival mode. It stops processing emotions deeply. You become practical, efficient, and emotionally distant. Research from the American Psychological Association shows that financial stress is one of the top predictors of marital conflict, not because of money itself, but because it reduces emotional availability. In simple English, when you worry about money, you have less energy to care. That night, I realized something uncomfortable. I had been treating money like a shield. If I earn more, everything will be fine. That belief is very common, especially for people starting over in a new country. But it creates a quiet trade. You trade presence for provision. You trade listening for solving. And love doesn't feel loved when it's treated like a problem to fix. Here's a small English moment for you. I remember saying, slowly, carefully, because my English felt as fragile as my emotions, "I think money can help, but it cannot hold us together." Simple words. Broken grammar. But real. My partner nodded, eyes tired, not relieved. Because the truth doesn't always comfort immediately. Sometimes it just opens the door. If you're learning English and feel stuck, unmotivated, or ashamed of going slow, this is for you. Language learning and relationships work the same way. You don't quit because you're bad. You quit because you feel unsafe making mistakes. In marriage, mistakes cost feelings. In English, mistakes cost ego. Your brain hates both. Neuroscience backs this up. When you feel emotionally unsafe, your amygdala, the brain's alarm system, takes over. Learning shuts down. Connection shuts down. That's why yelling never fixes relationships, and pressure never fixes language learning. Safety does. So when people ask, can money save a marriage? I now hear a deeper question. Can I stop feeling afraid? And fear doesn't disappear with more dollars. It disappears with more honesty, more listening, more patience. Spoken slowly, imperfectly, like beginner English. That night didn't fix us. But it named the real problem. And naming something is the first step to learning it, whether it's love or language. 3 weeks in America. 3 weeks sounds short, almost like a vacation. But when you move countries with a marriage and children, 3 weeks can feel like 3 years compressed into one long, jet-lagged breath. Every day in America felt louder than expected. Cars were bigger. Supermarkets were brighter. Prices were higher. And inside my head, English was playing on fast forward while my emotions were stuck on buffering. On the surface, we were doing fine. We had a place to stay. The kids were healthy. I was working, trying, pushing. But relationships don't live on the surface. They live in the tiny moments. Who speaks first in the morning? Who sighs during dinner? Who stops asking questions because the answers feel too heavy? Around the second week, those moments started changing. You know that feeling when you're learning English and you understand every word in a sentence, but somehow miss the meaning? That's what was happening in my marriage. We talked. We coordinated schedules. We discussed money. But we stopped connecting. Everything sounded practical. Nothing felt warm. Cultural shock didn't help. In the US, time moves fast and patience feels expensive. Back home, family time had pauses. Here, even rest felt scheduled. Studies on immigrant families show that sudden environmental change increases marital stress by up to 40% in the first month. Your nervous system is constantly scanning for danger. New rules, new accents, new expectations. Love gets tired when the nervous system is tired. Money became the background noise. Not screaming, just humming constantly. Rent, insurance, school supplies, groceries that somehow doubled without warning. We didn't argue loudly. We argued quietly, with tone, with timing, with what psychologists call micro-withdrawals. Less eye contact. Shorter replies. A lot of it's fine, that clearly wasn't fine. One night, while washing dishes, I noticed my hands moving automatically. Plate, rinse, dry. My brain was doing the same thing in English. Automatic phrases, survival vocabulary. No curiosity. No joy. That's when it hit me. I was surviving my life the same way I was surviving English. Just enough to function. Not enough to feel alive. There's a concept in psychology called emotional bandwidth. It's the mental space you need to care, learn, and empathize. Financial pressure eats that bandwidth first. Then parenting stress. Then cultural adjustment. By the time you get to love, there's almost nothing left. So couples don't fall out of love dramatically. They starve it quietly. Here's something practical, both for marriage and for English learners. When bandwidth is low, complexity kills motivation. You don't need deep conversations or perfect sentences. You need small, safe signals. A simple "Are you okay?" A slow sentence in English you're not sure is correct. Safety grows from repetition, not perfection. I started practicing that. Instead of explaining plans, I shared feelings, short ones. I feel tired today. In English, I'm not confident, but I try. Funny thing is, when you speak simply, people listen more closely. Science agrees. Research from UCLA shows that emotional clarity, not vocabulary size, predicts relationship satisfaction. The same applies to communication in a second language. 3 weeks in America didn't break our marriage, but it stripped away illusions. It showed us what was missing when comfort disappeared. And it showed me why people quit learning English, not because it's hard, but because life already feels hard enough. When everything is new, your brain asks one question: is this safe? If the answer is no, you pull back, from language, from love, from effort. That's not weakness. That's biology. The real challenge isn't money. It isn't English. It's rebuilding safety in unfamiliar places, one small sentence at a time. When love meets bills. Nobody tells you this, but love sounds very different when it meets bills. It loses its music and starts speaking in numbers. Not romantic numbers. Utility numbers. Due dates. Percentages. In our third week in the US, I noticed that every serious conversation began with money and ended with exhaustion. Even affection felt scheduled, like something we'd return to once the spreadsheet was under control. You might recognize this pattern from learning English. At first, you're curious. Then life gets busy. Suddenly, English becomes another task on a long list. Not joy. Just obligation. That's what happened to us. Love became something we managed, not something we lived. There's a psychological reason for this. Behavioral economists call it scarcity mindset. When resources feel limited, money, time, emotional energy, your brain narrows its focus. You become efficient but rigid. You stop asking big questions like how are we? And start asking small ones like how much is left? According to research from Princeton, scarcity can reduce cognitive capacity by the equivalent of losing an entire night's sleep. No wonder conversations feel dull and reactive. Bills don't argue. People do. But bills create the conditions where people argue about everything else. One evening, while reviewing expenses, my partner sighed and said nothing. That silence wasn't about money. It was about fear. Fear of failing as parents. Fear of choosing the wrong country. Fear that love alone might not be enough here. Here's the uncomfortable truth I learned. Money doesn't create marital problems. It reveals them. If communication was weak before, money exposes it. If roles were unclear, money hardens them. If affection depended on comfort, money tests it. Like English, stress doesn't change who you are. It shows you where you are. I remember trying to explain a financial plan in English, slowly, choosing safe words. We can try reduce spending. Step by step. My grammar was imperfect, but the intention was careful. And something shifted. When you slow down your language, you slow down your emotions. Neuroscience supports this. Slower speech activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the part that calms you down. Fast talk escalates. Slow talk connects. That night, we didn't solve the money problem, but we stopped treating each other like problems. That's a huge difference. Many couples fail not because they lack solutions, but because they lose the emotional space to search for them together. For English learners, this matters deeply. If you only practice English when life is easy, you're training your brain to quit under pressure. But if you allow English into imperfect moments, tired, unsure, emotionally real, you're building resilience. You're telling your brain, I can stay present even when this is uncomfortable. One practical exercise I started using came from relationship therapy, not language school. It's called name before solve. First, name the feeling. Then, if there's energy left, solve the problem. In marriage, that means saying, I feel scared before saying, we need more money. In English practice, it means admitting, I'm confused, before forcing fluency. Honesty reduces internal resistance. Bills kept coming. Love kept adjusting. Neither disappeared. But I began to see that the real danger wasn't financial strain, it was emotional shutdown. When people shut down, they stop learning, loving, and listening. They survive, but they don't grow. So when love meets bills, the question isn't whether you can afford your life. It's whether you can afford to stay emotionally awake inside it. And staying awake, like learning English, starts with slowing down and letting yourself be human. Silence at the dinner table. Silence is strange. It doesn't shout. It doesn't accuse. It just sits there between plates and glasses, pretending to be polite. One evening, our dinner table sounded like a library. Forks touched plates. Kids chewed carefully. Nobody was angry. That was the scary part. Anger means energy. Silence means withdrawal. If you've ever stopped practicing English without deciding to quit, you understand this silence. You don't say, I give up. You just stop opening the app. Stop repeating sentences. Stop believing effort will matter. That's what was happening at our table. Not conflict. Disengagement. Psychologists call this emotional stonewalling. It's one of the strongest predictors of relationship breakdown, according to research by Dr. John Gottman. Not yelling. Not arguing. Silence. Because silence tells the other person, you're not worth my energy right now. And energy, once gone, is very hard to rebuild. The irony is that silence often feels safer. When money is tight and life feels uncertain, talking feels risky. Words might trigger blame. Emotions might spill. So your brain chooses quiet. From a survival perspective, that makes sense. The nervous system prefers predictability over connection when stress is high. But safety without connection slowly turns into loneliness. I noticed the same thing in my English learning. I wasn't making mistakes anymore. Because I wasn't speaking. My English sounded perfect in my head. Just like our marriage looked fine from the outside. But perfection without expression is just absence. One night, my youngest asked a simple question at dinner. Why are you both so quiet? Kids don't analyze. They observe. That question hit harder than any argument. Studies show children are highly sensitive to emotional tone, even when parents hide conflict. Silence doesn't protect them. It confuses them. That was the moment I realized something uncomfortable. We weren't avoiding fights for peace. We were avoiding vulnerability. Saying how you feel, especially in a second language, feels like walking without armor. But armor also blocks hugs. There's a useful concept from communication science called low-stakes dialogue. It means talking about small, safe things to rebuild trust before addressing big issues. Not money. Not future plans. Just presence. This food reminds me of home. I feel tired today. Simple sentences. Slow English. Human pace. I tried that. One evening I said softly, I miss laughing with you. No explanation. No solution. Just truth. My grammar wasn't perfect. My voice wasn't confident. But something shifted. Silence cracked, just a little. Neuroscience explains why. When emotional signals feel safe, the brain releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone. Oxytocin doesn't come from solving problems. It comes from shared vulnerability. That's why perfect English won't connect you to people, but honest English might. Here's a practical takeaway for you as an English learner. If you wait until you're confident to speak, you'll wait forever. Confidence comes after expression, not before. The same rule applies to love. You don't reconnect because you feel close. You feel close because you reconnect. Silence at the dinner table taught me this. Absence doesn't mean peace. It means something important isn't being said. And whether you're learning a language or saving a marriage, unspoken words don't disappear. They just sit there, quietly deciding the future for you. Children see everything. People think children don't understand adult problems. They're wrong. Children understand everything, just not in words. They read tone, timing, distance. They notice who talks, who avoids eye contact, who smiles late. In our American apartment, during that third week, I started seeing my marriage reflected in my kids' behavior, and it was uncomfortable in a very honest way. My oldest became unusually quiet. Not sad. Just careful. Like someone walking on thin ice. My younger one asked more questions than usual, questions that sounded innocent but weren't. Are we staying here forever? Why do you work so much now? Children ask questions the way scientists do, not to judge, but to understand patterns. And the pattern they were seeing wasn't money. It was emotional distance. There's a concept in developmental psychology called emotional attunement. It means children regulate their emotions by reading their caregiver's emotional state. When parents are tense but silent, kids don't feel safe. They feel confused. Studies from Harvard Center on the Developing Child show that chronic emotional ambiguity in the home increases stress hormones in children, even when there is no visible conflict. In simple terms, kids feel the stress you don't talk about. That realization hit me harder than any financial worry. I could justify stress. I could justify sacrifice. But I couldn't justify teaching my children that love means quiet endurance. That communication means avoidance. That was not the English, or the life, I wanted them to learn. Here's where this connects deeply to language learning. Children don't learn language through textbooks. They learn through exposure, repetition, and emotional context. They copy how you speak before they copy what you say. Adults are no different. We just pretend otherwise. If your emotional environment is tense, your brain associates learning with danger. That's why practicing English can suddenly feel exhausting when life gets heavy. One evening, my child interrupted a very adult silence with a very simple sentence. Can we talk? Not about money. Not about plans. Just talk. That moment reframed everything. Because children don't need solutions. They need signals. Signals that connection is still alive. I decided to experiment, both as a parent and as an English learner. I started narrating emotions out loud, slowly, imperfectly. I feel tired today, but I'm happy you're here. Simple English. Clear tone. No drama. Something interesting happened. The room softened. The kids relaxed. My partner leaned in instead of pulling away. Neuroscience explains this beautifully. When emotions are labeled verbally, activity in the amygdala decreases and activity in the prefrontal cortex increases. This is called affect labeling. It literally calms the brain. That's why naming feelings helps children self-regulate, and why it helps adults learn under stress. Words create safety. Many parents believe protecting children means hiding problems. But what children actually need is regulated honesty. Not panic. Not silence. Calm truth at their level. The same principle applies to learning English. You don't need perfect sentences. You need regulated effort, slow, honest, consistent. I realized something humbling. My children were learning English faster than me, not because they were smarter, but because they weren't afraid of sounding wrong. They spoke with emotion first, accuracy second. Love works the same way. When accuracy replaces authenticity, connection fades. So I changed one small habit. Every day at dinner, each person shared one feeling. Not a story. Just a feeling. Excited. Nervous. Thankful. Sometimes in English. Sometimes mixed. No corrections. No fixing. Just listening. This tiny ritual did more for our family than any financial plan that week. If you're watching this and struggling to stay motivated with English, ask yourself this: what emotional lesson are you practicing when you quit? And what lesson are you practicing when you try again, imperfectly, in front of others? Your brain, and your children, are always watching. Children see everything. Not your bank balance. Not your grammar mistakes. They see whether connection survives pressure. Whether love speaks, even when it's tired. And that lesson, once learned, lasts much longer than money. Money as a mirror. Money is rarely the villain. It just holds up a mirror and refuses to blink. In our third week in the United States, I stopped seeing money as the enemy and started seeing it as a very honest observer. It didn't create tension. It revealed it. It showed us where we were already fragile, where we had been avoiding conversations long before dollars entered the room. You might think financial stress changes people. Psychology suggests something more uncomfortable. Stress removes filters. According to stress research from Stanford, pressure reduces the brain's ability to mask emotions and habits. In other words, Money doesn't turn you into someone else. It shows who you've been when no one was watching. In our case, money exposed how differently we related to safety. I saw money as responsibility. My partner saw it as security. Same object. Different emotional meaning. That mismatch had existed for years, quietly. America just turned up the volume. When meanings clash, couples don't argue about facts. They argue about feelings disguised as logic. This happens in English learning too. One person learns English for career growth. Another learns it for confidence or belonging. Same language. Different emotional goals. When progress slows, frustration appears, not because English is hard, but because the why is threatened. Money and language both fail when their emotional purpose is unclear. There's a concept in relationship therapy called symbolic conflict. It means couples fight about something concrete, money, chores, schedules, when the real issue is emotional needs like appreciation, safety, or autonomy. In our home, money symbolized control versus trust. And no budget spreadsheet can solve that. One night, instead of discussing numbers, we asked a different question. What does money mean to you right now? Not what it does. Not how much we need. What it means. The answers were slow, careful, honest. And suddenly, the tension made sense. Fear was speaking, not greed. Exhaustion was speaking, not criticism. This is where slow English became an unexpected ally. When you don't have advanced vocabulary, you're forced to simplify. I feel scared. I need stability. I'm afraid to fail. Basic words. Big truths. Linguists call this semantic compression, using fewer words to express core meaning. It's powerful because it reduces misunderstanding. Neuroscience supports this approach. When communication focuses on core emotional meaning rather than complex reasoning, the brain processes it with less resistance. The prefrontal cortex stays engaged, instead of handing control to emotional defense systems. In plain terms, simple honesty keeps conversations from exploding. I began to see money as feedback, not failure. When we felt tense discussing it, it wasn't because we were bad with finances. It was because we hadn't aligned emotionally. The same is true when English feels frustrating. Difficulty is feedback, not judgment. It's telling you where support is missing. Here's a practical exercise that helped both our marriage and my English practice. We separated money talk from meaning talk. Once a week, we talked about numbers. Calmly. Briefly. Separately, we talked about feelings, without solutions. No fixing allowed. Just listening. This prevented money from hijacking every conversation. For English learners, try this. Separate practice from performance. Practice when no one is judging. Perform only when necessary. Your brain learns faster when it knows mistakes are allowed somewhere. Safety accelerates growth. Pressure slows it. Money didn't save our marriage, but it clarified it. It forced us to ask better questions. Questions about trust, fear, and shared direction. And those questions, once spoken, lost their power to divide. A mirror doesn't flatter you. It shows you the truth, so you can adjust. Money does the same. And if you're brave enough to look, it doesn't end relationships. It gives them a chance to grow up. A small English moment. It didn't happen during a big argument or a dramatic breakthrough. It happened in a hallway, with bad lighting and tired faces. That's usually where real change hides. I was putting on my shoes, running late, mind already racing through numbers and responsibilities, when my partner said one simple sentence in English, "Can you slow down and listen?" The grammar wasn't perfect. The pause was awkward. But something about that sentence stopped me cold. When you hear English spoken slowly, imperfectly, your brain does something interesting. It leans in. You pay attention not to how polished it sounds, but to what it's trying to carry. That moment reminded me why slow English exists in the first place, not to teach rules, but to create connection when emotions are heavy. That sentence worked because it did three things. It asked, not accused. It named a need, not a flaw. And it gave me time to respond. Communication science calls this processing space. When speech is slower and simpler, the listener's brain has room to stay regulated. Fast, complex language feels threatening under stress. Slow language feels safe. In relationships, speed kills connection. In language learning, speed kills confidence. I realized I had been doing both, rushing conversations, rushing English, rushing outcomes. And rushing is often just fear wearing productivity clothes. There's solid research behind this. Studies on second language communication show that reduced speech rate improves comprehension and emotional resonance, even among fluent speakers. Similarly, couples who intentionally slow their communication during conflict show higher long-term satisfaction. Slowness isn't weakness. It's regulation. I responded in English too, not because I wanted to practice, but because English forced me to be careful. "I didn't know you felt that way," I said. Short. Honest. Not defensive. And in that small exchange, something shifted. Not magically, but noticeably. This was the moment I understood how language learning and love intersect. Both fail when we treat them as performance. Both grow when we treat them as presence. English isn't something you show off. Love isn't something you win. They're both something you stay inside of, especially when it's uncomfortable. For many learners, English becomes associated with judgment, tests, corrections, embarrassment. Your nervous system learns to brace itself. Marriage can fall into the same trap. Conversations feel like evaluations. Who's right? Who's failing? Who's trying harder? And once communication feels like a test, honesty disappears. That small English moment rewired something in me. I stopped correcting. I stopped planning my reply while the other person was still speaking. I started listening for emotion first, meaning second, grammar last. Strangely, my English improved when I stopped trying to improve it. Neuroscientists explain this with implicit learning. When the brain feels safe, it absorbs patterns naturally, without conscious effort. That's how children learn language. That's how adults reconnect emotionally. Safety comes before skill. I began to apply one simple rule at home and in my English practice: slow down at the first sign of tension. Slower words. Longer pauses. Fewer explanations. When tension dropped, understanding rose. This rule sounds obvious, but under stress, your brain does the opposite. It speeds up. It talks more. It listens less. Here's a concrete technique you can use today. The next time you feel rushed, whether in English or in a relationship, limit yourself to one sentence. Not because you have nothing more to say, but because clarity lives in restraint. One sentence spoken calmly often does more than 5 spoken urgently. That hallway conversation didn't fix our finances. It didn't erase stress. But it restored something essential, the feeling that we were on the same side again. And once that feeling returned, problems became shared instead of personal. A small English moment taught me a big truth. When words slow down, hearts catch up. And sometimes, that's all it takes to keep something alive. The science of connection. Most people think connection is emotional, soft, almost mysterious. Science disagrees. Connection is biological. It lives in your nervous system, not in your intentions. And during our weeks in the US, when everything felt unstable, I learned that love doesn't disappear because people stop caring. It disappears because their nervous systems stop feeling safe. This matters more than you think. Especially if you're trying to hold a marriage together while learning English in a new country. Because your brain doesn't separate these experiences. Stress is stress. Fear is fear. Whether it comes from money, language, or uncertainty, your body reacts the same way. Neuroscience talks about something called polyvagal theory. In simple terms, your nervous system is constantly asking one question: am I safe? If the answer is no, your body shifts into protection mode. You become defensive, distant, impatient. Not because you want to, but because biology takes over. In that state, learning shuts down. Empathy shuts down. Love becomes effortful. That explained so much for me. Why English felt harder than it should. Why small misunderstandings in our marriage felt huge. Why I wanted solutions instead of conversations. My nervous system wasn't calm. It was guarding. Studies from relationship psychology show that emotional safety, not passion, not income, not compatibility, is the strongest predictor of long-term marital satisfaction. Couples who feel safe can survive almost anything. Couples who don't feel safe struggle even when life looks successful on paper. Here's the uncomfortable part. Safety is not created by promises or plans. It's created moment by moment, through tone, timing, and attention. The way you say something matters more than what you say. The same sentence can feel loving or threatening depending on speed and softness. This is why slow English is powerful. When you speak slowly, your voice naturally lowers. Your breathing deepens. Your body relaxes. That physical shift signals safety to the listener, and to yourself. You're not just practicing language. You're regulating your nervous system. I tested this intentionally. When conversations at home started to feel tense, I slowed my speech on purpose. Not dramatically. Just enough. Short sentences. Gentle pauses. The effect was immediate. Shoulders dropped. Eye contact returned. No miracle. just biology doing its job. Cognitive science supports this. When speech rate decreases, the brain's threat response decreases as well. That allows the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for reasoning, empathy, and learning, to stay online. Fast, pressured speech pushes people into survival mode. Slow speech invites connection. This reframed how I saw both marriage and English. Neither is about effort alone. They're about environment. You can't force growth in an unsafe environment. You can't shame yourself into fluency. You can't pressure someone into feeling close. That's why motivation disappears when life gets hard. Your brain isn't lazy. It's protective. When learners say, "I just don't feel motivated anymore," what they're really saying is, "This doesn't feel safe right now." And safety must come first. So we changed one thing. Instead of asking, "How do we fix this?" we asked, "How do we make this feel safer?" Safer conversations. Safer mistakes. Safer emotions. Once safety returned, solutions followed naturally. You can apply this today. Before practicing English, check your body. Are your shoulders tense? Is your jaw tight? Slow down. Breathe. Say one sentence out loud calmly. Not to perform, but to arrive. Your brain learns best when it feels welcomed, not pushed. Connection isn't magic. It's mechanics. And once you understand the mechanics, you stop blaming yourself. You stop blaming your partner. You stop blaming English. You start working with your biology instead of against it. Money didn't save our marriage. Effort didn't either. Safety did. And safety, surprisingly, sounded a lot like slow, imperfect English spoken with care. What actually keeps love alive? Love doesn't survive on grand gestures. That's the movie version. Real love survives on boring, repeatable behaviors that don't look impressive on social media. After everything we experienced, money pressure, cultural shock, emotional distance, I finally understood that what keeps love alive is not intensity, but consistency. In the US, during that third week, nothing dramatic changed. No sudden financial breakthrough. No emotional confession under the stars. What changed was much smaller, and much harder to notice. We started showing up the same way, every day, even when it felt pointless. Psychology has a name for this: behavioral reliability. It means doing what you said you would do, at a human scale. Not perfect. Just dependable. Studies from the University of Washington show that couples who maintain small, predictable positive interactions are significantly more resilient under stress than couples who rely on emotional highs. This principle applies perfectly to English learning. Most people quit because they expect motivation to appear first. But motivation follows behavior, not the other way around. When effort is inconsistent, your brain doesn't trust the process. When effort is reliable, even if small, your brain relaxes. At home, we created tiny rituals. Not romantic ones. Practical ones. Morning coffee together, even for 5 minutes. A check-in text during the day that wasn't about logistics. A short walk after dinner. These weren't solutions. They were signals. Signals that said, "We're still here." Neuroscience explains why this works. The brain forms emotional security through repeated patterns, not emotional spikes. Dopamine responds to novelty, but oxytocin, the hormone that sustains bonds, responds to repetition and trust. Love doesn't need excitement every day. It needs predictability without boredom. English works the same way. 10 minutes a day beats 2 hours once a week. One sentence spoken daily beats perfect grammar once a month. Your brain craves rhythm more than intensity. When rhythm is missing, learning feels heavy. One thing surprised me. Once we stopped trying to fix our relationship, it actually improved. Fixing implies something is broken. Showing up implies something is worth caring for. That shift in mindset removed pressure. Pressure is poison to connection. I applied this to English too. I stopped measuring progress. I stopped testing myself. I just showed up. Read slowly. Spoke badly. Repeated often. Progress became invisible, but steady. Just like our marriage. There's a concept in psychology called maintenance behaviors. These are small actions that maintain emotional bonds without dramatic payoff. Compliments. Listening. Physical proximity. Shared routines. They're boring, and that's why they work. Boredom signals safety. Here's a practical rule that changed everything for me. Never let 2 days pass without a positive interaction. Not a deep talk. Just something warm. The same rule works for English. Never let 2 days pass without exposure. Even passive listening counts. Consistency beats brilliance. What actually keeps love alive is not money, not sacrifice, not even compatibility. It's the willingness to remain emotionally available when nothing exciting is happening. When life feels repetitive. When results are slow. And here's the irony. When you stop chasing intensity, you often get deeper connection. When you stop chasing fluency, your English improves. Because your nervous system finally trusts that this is safe to continue. Love doesn't need saving. It needs sustaining. And sustaining something means choosing it again and again, in small ways, without applause. That's not glamorous. But it's real. And real things last longer than dramatic ones. Learning English through pain. No one tells you this, but pain is a powerful teacher. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet, daily discomfort that sits in your chest and refuses to leave. During those weeks in the US, I wasn't motivated to learn English. I was forced to use it. And that changed everything. Pain stripped English of its academic feeling and turned it into a survival tool. When life hurts, your brain looks for meaning. If it can't find meaning, it shuts down. That's why many people stop learning when life gets heavy. English starts to feel irrelevant. I have bigger problems, you tell yourself. But what I discovered is the opposite. English became the bridge through pain, not an extra burden. Every emotional moment demanded words. Doctor visits. School emails. Simple conversations that carried emotional weight. My English didn't need to be beautiful. It needed to be available. That shift, from perfection to presence, changed my relationship with the language. Psychologists talk about context-dependent learning. You remember information better when it's tied to real emotional contexts. That's why vocabulary learned from life sticks longer than vocabulary from lists. Pain, strangely, makes learning deeper if you don't run from it. I stopped practicing English in isolation. I practiced it inside real moments. When I felt worried, I said, "I feel anxious." When I felt lost, I said, "I'm not sure." Simple sentences. Real emotions. My brain remembered them because they mattered. This is where many learners get stuck. They wait to feel confident before speaking. But confidence is a byproduct, not a prerequisite. Neuroscience confirms this. When you use language to regulate emotion, the brain forms stronger neural connections. English stopped being foreign. It became functional. Marriage amplified this effect. When emotions were raw, English forced clarity. I couldn't hide behind complex language or vague explanations. I had to be honest. I'm scared. I feel pressure. These sentences aren't advanced, but they're transformative. Pain also teaches humility. You stop caring about sounding smart. You care about being understood. That's when real communication begins. Many fluent speakers never reach this level because they stay in performance mode. Beginners, ironically, have access to deeper honesty. There's research on this too. Studies on emotional disclosure show that people who express vulnerability, imperfectly, experience stronger social bonds. Accuracy matters less than sincerity. This applies to both language and love. I began to recommend a strange practice to myself. Speak English only when it matters emotionally. Not constantly. Not for drills. For truth. That reduced burnout and increased relevance. English stopped draining me. It supported me. If you're struggling right now, with life, with motivation, with English, this is important. Don't wait for energy. Borrow it from necessity. Let English serve your life, not the other way around. Use it to name pain, not to escape it. Pain doesn't break learning. Avoidance does. When you stay present, even with broken sentences, your brain adapts. Growth becomes unavoidable. That's how English came back to me, not as a goal, but as a companion through difficulty. And strangely, once English stopped being the focus, progress returned. Pain taught me what textbooks couldn't. Language lives where life hurts. And if you let it, it can carry you through. A quiet turning point. Turning points are supposed to be loud. Big conversations. Clear decisions. Dramatic promises. That's what we expect. But the real turning point in our marriage didn't announce itself. It arrived quietly, almost politely, on a very ordinary morning, when nothing felt resolved and nothing felt hopeful either. It was a weekday. No special date. The kids were half awake. Coffee tasted average. And yet, something was different. Not better. Just softer. The tension that had been sitting in the air for weeks felt thinner. Like fog starting to lift without anyone noticing. The change wasn't emotional. It was behavioral. We had stopped waiting to feel connected before acting connected. We acted first. Feeling followed later. Psychologists call this behavioral activation. It's a well-documented principle in therapy. Action often precedes emotion, not the other way around. When people wait to feel motivated, they stay stuck. When they move first, gently, imperfectly, motivation slowly catches up. That morning, my partner handed me coffee without saying anything. I said thank you. Not dramatically. Just present. Eye contact lasted 1 second longer than usual. That was it. No speech. No analysis. But my nervous system noticed. Safety increased by a small but measurable amount. The same thing happened with English. I didn't suddenly feel confident. I just spoke when it was necessary and stopped apologizing for my accent. Not internally. Not out loud. I spoke, paused, corrected gently, and continued. That tiny shift, from self-judgment to self-allowance, changed everything. Neuroscience explains this turning point well. When small positive behaviors repeat, the brain updates its predictions. It stops expecting danger. Once danger expectations drop, emotional availability returns. Learning becomes easier. Connection becomes possible. We often misunderstand turning points because we're looking for emotional fireworks. But growth rarely announces itself. It sneaks in through consistency. I remember realizing this one evening while listening to my own voice in English. It sounded calmer. Not better. Just calmer. That calm wasn't language skill. It was nervous system regulation. And that regulation came from repeated safety, not sudden insight. In marriage, this meant fewer explanations and more presence. In English, it meant fewer rules and more usage. Both benefited from the same principle: reduce pressure, increase frequency. There's research showing that long-term relationship stability depends less on problem-solving skills and more on repair behaviors. These are small actions that repair emotional distance. Smiles, acknowledgements, gentle humor. The turning point isn't solving everything. It's restoring goodwill. That's what happened to us. We stopped trying to fix the marriage. We started repairing moments. And repairs don't feel dramatic. They feel normal. Almost boring. For English learners, this is important. If you're waiting for a breakthrough moment where everything clicks, you'll wait a long time. Language improves through quiet accumulation. One calm conversation. One understood sentence. One moment where you don't panic. The turning point is often invisible until you look back. You realize you're less afraid, less tense, more willing to try again. That morning didn't save our marriage. It proved something better. That saving wasn't necessary. What we needed was continuation. And continuation depends on small, repeatable behaviors, not emotional highs. Quiet turning points don't trend. They don't impress. But they last. And lasting is the whole point. The answer I didn't expect. I thought the answer would be complicated. Something wise, polished, maybe painful. I thought after all the stress, the money worries, the silence, the near misses, the answer to "can money save a marriage?" would arrive like a conclusion at the end of a long book. Clear. Final. Certain. But the answer I discovered was quieter than that, and much harder to ignore. The answer didn't come from a conversation. It came from a pattern. One morning, while walking my kids to school, I noticed something simple. We were laughing. Not loudly. Not performatively. Just lightly, naturally, about something unimportant. And in that moment, I realized money wasn't present at all. Neither was fear. What was present was aliveness. And that's when it hit me. Money had never been the thing holding us together, or pulling us apart. Psychology explains this with brutal honesty. Long-term relationship studies consistently show that once basic needs are met, additional income has almost no effect on marital satisfaction. What matters instead are perceived support, emotional responsiveness, and shared meaning. In simple English, feeling seen matters more than feeling secure on paper. Money can reduce stress, yes. But it cannot create connection. It cannot repair emotional distance. It cannot replace presence. It can only remove obstacles. And if connection isn't there to begin with, removing obstacles just reveals emptiness faster. That realization changed how I saw everything, including English. I had treated English the same way I treated money. As a solution. As a fix. If I speak better, life will be easier. And life does get easier in some ways. But English, like money, cannot carry meaning by itself. It only amplifies what you already bring into the conversation. When I spoke English to impress, it created distance. When I spoke English to connect, even badly, it created warmth. The difference wasn't skill. It was intention. The answer I didn't expect was this. What keeps a marriage alive is the willingness to stay emotionally reachable when it would be easier to retreat. Not dramatic love. Not endless patience. Just reachability. The same thing keeps language learning alive. Reachability looks boring. It looks like answering when you're tired. Listening when you want to fix. Speaking even when your sentence feels too simple to matter. It looks like staying. There's a concept in psychology called emotional availability. It predicts relationship longevity better than compatibility, communication techniques, or shared goals. Emotional availability means you are accessible, responsive, and engaged, especially under stress. That's it. No magic. Money doesn't create that. English fluency doesn't either. But both can support it, if you already practice it. So if you're watching this video feeling discouraged, about love, about family, about learning English, hear this clearly. You don't need to become someone else to move forward. You don't need more money first. You don't need perfect English first. You need to stay reachable. Stay reachable to your partner. Stay reachable to your children. Stay reachable to yourself when you make mistakes. The marriage didn't survive because we earned more. It survived because we stopped disappearing when things felt hard. The English didn't improve because I studied harder. It improved because I used it honestly. That's the real answer. Money can support a marriage. But it can't keep it alive. What keeps it alive is showing up, again and again, with imperfect words, tired bodies and open attention. And maybe that's why learning English through real life works. Because real life forces you to stay. If you're still watching right now, there's probably a quiet question living inside you, about money, about marriage, about family, or about why you've tried to learn English for so long but still feel stuck. The truth is, you're not failing. You're just carrying too much pressure alone. And this story isn't really over. Because out there, thousands of people are living the same silent struggle, working hard, protecting their family, and trying to learn English just to survive, not to impress. And it's these slow, real, emotional stories that help us hear English, understand ourselves, and keep going when we're close to giving up. If you want more real English stories told slowly and clearly, if you want to practice listening, reading, and speaking English without stress or shame, if you believe English should support your life, not exhaust it, then subscribe to this channel right now. In the next videos, we'll continue with real English story practice through marriage, family, and children. Slow English listening and speaking for tired learners. Everyday English for life in the USA. No textbooks, no pressure. Stories that help you learn English and heal at the same time. Leave a comment below. What's weighing on you the most right now? Money, marriage, or learning English? Your answer might inspire the next story. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next video might be the one you needed to hear at exactly the right moment. Not to become fluent faster, but to not quit today.